Hi guys, this is Jordan,
And I'm Maya.
and today we're going to be discussing the brothers' spending spree.
Let's talk about money.
So, if I feel like if we're going to talk about the brothers' spending spree, first we really need to delve into the brothers' spending habits before the crime, because I feel like that's something that doesn't really get mentioned that much.
Yeah, I feel like people always like to talk about how much they spent after and how they were living like kings or whatever, but they were living like kings before they killed their parents, too.
I mean, obviously your parents had money and they spent it on you and your brother, but the thing that got everyone's attention was the spending spree after they died. You know, the Rolexes and the Porsche and the tennis coach.
I get it. Yeah.
So why explain that? Why did you guys go on that spending spree?
I think it's characterized as a spending spree because it sort of they condense it into how much money did you spend after your parents died. But at the trial, it was very clear that this was a family that sort of just spent money like water before. I had spent a huge amount of money before, as all the family members did. We didn't really think about money. It was a wealthy family that spent money on, a lot of things. So money corrupts the narrative of it, and it just, there's a sense that, okay, wealth means greed, and that must always be the motive for everything. And it's not.
Yeah, I mean, they had lived in mansions for most of their life. They'd always known fancy cars and just wealth in general. Tennis coaches, tennis clubs.
Private schools.
Yeah, so I mean, they had always been surrounded by money. It wasn't really anything new to them.
Kitty was a huge spender, too. Like, she would go out and just shop and shop and shop all the time. Like, just buy new clothes instead of washing them. Like, that was the kind of wealth that they were enjoying.
Yeah, I think
family.
Erik actually said in the documentary Erik Tells All that that's how not Erik, that's how Kitty and Lyle dealt with their depression, is that they would go out and just spend money. I think that's quite a common thing. Like, there's the term retail therapy exists for a reason. It's because a lot of people spend money when they're depressed.
Yeah. And it just happened that in this family, they had the means to do that on a regular basis.
So when they actually did have access to all of the money without any restrictions, their spending habits were pretty much the same. As for the actual estate, though, wasn't Lyle supposed to become the executor, like, not that long after the killings, before the parents were killed anyway?
Yeah, so Lyle was going to become the executor of the estate at age 22, and he was 21 when the parents were killed. So, if this was a killing done for money, why didn't he just wait until he would have total control over the estate if the parents died? Because he was 21 and hadn't become the executor yet, all of the purchases had to go through their aunt and uncle, who were the executors.
Yeah, I think that's another point that people sort of like to leave out as well when they discuss the brothers' spending habits after the crime. From what I can tell, most of their purchases after the crime were either encouraged or needed the permission of their family members first.
Yeah. Especially all the major ones did. I think they bought cars and rented apartments and things, and all of those purchases were approved by other adults in their lives, either the executors or other relatives.
Yeah. I mean, if we want to get into whether this was actually a killing for money or not, What about the information that the brothers testified that they had already been told by Jose that he had written them out of the will, a year before the killings actually took place?
Yeah, he told them, I believe, toward the end of 1988 that they were out of the will. And then he also told their uncle, the executor, Carlos Baralt, that he had written a new will that disinherited Lyle and Erik, and that he had told the brothers about the existence of that will.
Yeah, this was in the spring of 1989. So if he had already told the brothers, a few months before the killings, I already have a new will that disinherits you, how is it that, why would the brothers wait all that time to kill if it was for the money? I can sort of see it as if like Jose had told them, yeah, you're already out, I've written you out of my will already, as a threat, but he was never actually going to. Because I don't think Jose would have. It would have been too much of an embarrassment, I think. It would be too embarrassing, like, for his public image to have his sons disinherited publicly. So I don't think he ever would have. But he had told the brothers they were disinherited. So what did the brothers actually spend money on beforehand? So, I mean, do you want to talk about Lyle's spending first?
Yeah, so Lyle had always been a big spender. Sort of like we were talking about with Kitty, that he would just go shopping on a regular basis for retail therapy. But he also spent a lot of money on his girlfriends and gave them lots of gifts. I think he testified that when he was in high school dating a girl named Stacy, that he bought her jewelry all the time, and that all of this money was coming from his parents. And that when Stacy broke up with him, he bought her a fur coat to try to win her back, essentially. I don't think it worked, but that's the kind of spending that was happening by Lyle before. It was very extravagant and what you would expect of a wealthy kid.
He was always a big spender. Erik, though, not so much. He wasn't really a materialistic person, so much so that his first girlfriend, Kirsten Smith, had to take him out to buy an entire new wardrobe because he only wore tennis gear. That stood out to me a lot because here's someone who's living in a very wealthy neighborhood.
That was in Calabasas.
Yeah, he was in Calabasas at the time. That stood out to me because it's just odd that he has no clothes, but he's rich. The only thing he wears is tennis gear.
And I think it was when Kirsten realized that Erik didn't have any clothes, Kitty just gave them her credit card and said, Kirsten, go buy Erik clothes. So it was not like there was restricted access on the money in any way.
I mean, Kitty just gave her card to some random person. Well, okay, not a random person, Erik's girlfriend, and said. But I don't think they had been dating that long either at that time. And Kitty was pretty seemingly easygoing about the fact that she was giving her credit card to someone to, I don't know, I guess spend a lot of money with.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, I don't think they even spent it at fancy stores either.
No. Although, to be fair, I don't think they actually spent the money when they went shopping initially. They picked out all the clothes, and then they came back. I think Kitty went back at a later date with Erik to pick up the clothes and pay for them.
Oh.
I'm not sure why they didn't buy them when they were there, though. And I mean, the car he drove as well, a Ford Escort, that's not really a fancy car.
No, I think I was looking it up, and I think it said it was like the most popular car at that time or something, so it wasn't something exclusive. Lyle, on the other hand, didn't he drive an Alfa?
Alfa Romeo.
Yeah. Which is definitely like a fancy car. Although I think it had some problems with it, because I remember him discussing it because he bought a new car after the parents died, and on his cross-examination, he was asked about that, and he said that car, the Alfa Romeo, had like engine problems or something.
Yeah, I think this came up in Glenn's testimony as well, Glenn Stevens.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, Lyle had called that car like a piece of shit or something.
Well, I think if you're calling an Alfa Romeo a piece of shit, you're probably a
rich kid.
A rich kid.
Yeah.
Like, I think Lyle had access to credit cards or like his parents' money at age 12, if I remember his testimony correctly.
Where did the money come for all these animals and jewelry and fur coats?
My parents, they didn't necessarily give me the money for those purposes, but there was just money. My house had money just laying around, and
What do you mean just laying around?
my dad, every time he came home, he took out his pockets and he'd throw his money and his credit cards and everything on the counter, and just wouldn't pick it up the next day. My mom didn't do anything, and there would just be money around. And sometimes I would use that, but my mom and dad gave me quite a bit of money frequently.
Did you have use of credit cards?
Well, I had the money access card, which I used mostly. I had a credit card also, my mom's credit card that I was authorized to use, but mostly I just used the money access machine where you just put in the card and take out $100 or something, and it was never a problem.
How old were you when you were authorized to use the money access card?
It was when we started in Pennington, since 6th grade, 12.
So you can imagine that he's used to just handing it over and not thinking about the actual value of what he was spending it on.
Okay, that's about it for like the before the killings. But after the killings,
they found the will, the 1981 will, pretty quickly. But then they continued to search for a new will after they found the 1981 will, because Jose had told Carlos he had written a new will that disinherited the brothers. This was all discussed among all the relatives at the time, too. I think that this point of, like, literally the entire family was searching for a new will because Jose had said there was a new will is key. Because if the brothers were seriously concerned about it, wouldn't they be, like, dissuading people from doing that?
Yeah, I don't think they found the old will, like, straight away, though. I think it took them a week or something. It was found in, I believe, a drawer in the parents' bathroom.
Really? That's where their will was?
I think so. I remember reading that somewhere. I think it might be in Robert's book, actually.
Huh.
But yeah, I was thinking, it's a bit odd.
That is a very strange place.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they ended up giving up on like finding the new will because I mean, I don't know anything about writing wills, but don't you have to have like at least someone else be like a witness to the will?
Mm, I don't know.
Because I remember Marta was talking about that in her testimony, that she was one of the witnesses to like the 1981 will, and so she already knew what was on it before they found it.
Oh, yeah.
And
I guess because she didn't know that Jose had indicated that he changed it.
yeah. So what I was thinking was like maybe they went around to like a bunch of people and like attorneys and accountants that were associated with the family and were asking them like, hey, is there a new will? And were you witness to it? And they all said no. That's just me theorizing a little bit.
Yeah, that would make sense. And then that would, verify for them that it was just a verbal threat in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But he did tell Carlos he was going to do it, so they had a good reason to believe that it existed.
Yeah.
And I guess since at that point they were living in California with none of their close family members living nearby, that it would make sense that someone who wasn't a family member would be a witness to it. Like in 1981, when the will that was eventually found was written and Marta was a witness to that, she was living in New Jersey and was a financial planner. So, makes sense. I mean, that's about all I remember from that whole situation. So, something that always gets brought up is that the brothers bought Rolex watches 2 days after the parents were killed. But what never gets brought up is that in front of the clerk, they called their Uncle Carlos to ask him if it was okay to purchase the watches.
So yeah, they're looking for permission. It's not like they're doing this secretly, underhandedly.
And, I think the fact that Carlos said yes, I guess we assume he said yes. I think if they were calling to ask for his permission, he said no, and they showed up with Rolexes would not be good. But, the fact that he said yes also confirms that these were not abnormal purchases for them.
In Lyle's testimony, do you remember his cross-examination where he gets asked about the Rolex watches?
And what you did was you killed your parents and then began to spend their money, right?
Well, that's something that happened, but I don't think characterizing that way is putting it in the right context.
Well, why did you need to buy a Rolex watch 4 days after your parents were killed?
I didn't need to.
You wanted to.
Well, what happened that day is that my uncles had talked to my brother and I, and that I think it was mainly my brother needed to get suits for the memorial service in LA that was coming up, and also for the one that they were planning in New Jersey. And we were sort of cooped up in the hotel and told us to go out and do that, and we did. And we went to Bullock's at one of the shopping centers, and we went ahead and got the suits and so on and purchased that. And we were wandering around, and I was sort of down and kind of depressed and just wandering around into stores. And we were in the jewelry store, and I don't know why, but I just purchased the Rolexes. And at some point in the purchase, I started to feel awkward about it, probably for the reasons that you're feeling awkward about it right now. And I called my uncle and asked him about it, and he said, don't worry about it, just go ahead and do it. So I think it was my uncle, but it was some relative.
For the reasons that I'm feeling awkward about it right now?
Well, I realize that, I look back and I think that it sounds awful, and I wish that I hadn't bought them. And it, it is a bad thing. But it wasn't for any specific reason. It was just something I was wandering in the store and I was feeling down, and I bought them.
So you just thought a $9,000 18-karat gold Rolex would go nicely with your funeral suit. Is that right?
No, I didn't. I really didn't think much about money in my life, and I just sort of bought things spur of the moment all the time, and this was just another thing.
And what he says in that testimony is essentially like, we were shopping, I was depressed, we wandered into the store, and I just handed over the card. Which is like, sounds familiar to his mother.
Yeah. I feel like this sort of plays more into Lyle wanting to sort of upkeep the image of the family, and he sort of, it wasn't as if he just went out randomly 2 days after the murders to buy a Rolex watch because he felt like it. He was out shopping for the memorial service, and he thought that it might look good to buy some, to like have some Rolexes.
Because the memorial service was at the Screen Actors Guild, or no, what was it called? The Directors Guild, some like really fancy.
Yeah, the Screen Actors Guild, I think it was. But like they knew that they were going to have to represent for their family, so they wanted to look good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they were going to be around all of Jose's fancy Hollywood business people. Okay, I have a question for you. What do you think about people who say that their spending after was them feeling justified in killing their abusers, and they were gonna, spend all their money and celebrate the fact that they had gotten rid of these horrible people from their lives?
I mean, I have thought about that a little bit, but I don't buy into it completely. I do think it's sort of plays into Lyle's possible hero complex afterwards. That's a completely different thing that we could talk about another time. But I do think there might have been an aspect of Lyle feeling almost justified in a way, and that he maybe kind of had a right to spend money afterwards. Now, I don't know that that's true for a fact, but I think it's possible. But I'm not going to say that I believe that completely, because I do think it was mostly just him spending money because that is what he always did beforehand anyway. And he was just continuing his habit.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it too. It's like, maybe there was a part of him that was like, I just saved my brother from this horrible abuse, and now I know who my father really was, and I can go off and spend his money on whatever I want, and I deserve that because I'm a hero. But I don't think that was the primary motivation.
What was the next thing that happened? Was it the conversation with Marta straight after that? Because they were at the Bellage Hotel, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And the family members had all like gathered round, and Marta had to basically discuss with the brothers what they would be inheriting in terms of the will, and also Jose's like life insurance policies, right?
Right. Well, I just watched this. I think my understanding is that Marta, basically as soon as she got to California after Jose's death, she sort of started going through his office with his secretary and trying to find any relevant papers or figure out his worth, essentially, because she was a financial planner and she was the one who had the knowledge to do that. So she kind of gathered all that together and, like, a little later in that week, sat down with Erik and Lyle to have a conversation with them about what their father was worth, essentially.
She didn't actually tell them what the meeting was going to be about, though, when she initially told them that she needed to speak with them, though, right?
Right.
When Marta actually started talking with the brothers, and she let them know what they would be inheriting and what money they'd be getting from Jose's life insurance policy. I think, who was it? I think it was Erik who initially said, like, no, Aunt Marta, like, we're not getting anything, or something like that.
Yeah. Because I think she started by talking about the life insurance policy. Oh, no. She started talking about what they would be inheriting, and I think both brothers said, yeah, like, no, Dad took us out of the will.
Something that sticks out in my head, I don't know where I read or heard this. It might have been in the testimony or something that I read, where I think one of the brothers or both of them said, don't talk to us about that, Aunt Marta, like, we're not getting any money, or something like that.
Yeah. And then she brought up the life insurance policy, and Erik said that Jose hadn't taken the physical for it.
But he was thinking of a different policy, right?
Right. So there was a life insurance policy from the company that Jose needed to take a physical for. And he had some, like, heart problems, right, that year?
Yeah, he had a minor heart attack, I think it was said.
Yeah, and so he was trying to, like, postpone taking the physical for the life insurance policy as long as possible so that he could pass it.
It was for 5 million, I think, as well.
Yeah. That sounds right.
Yeah.
But in any event, he never took that physical, and Erik knew that because Kitty had been nagging him about it.
I mean, and you could also make the argument, like, if this was a killing for money, why didn't they wait until Jose took that physical? It's an extra 5 million. If you wanted your parents' money and you knew that there was a potential 5 million waiting for you, wouldn't you want to wait?
Yeah. So after Erik tells Aunt Marta that Jose never took the physical for the $5 million life insurance policy, Aunt Marta explains that she had actually taken out a $500,000 private life insurance policy on Jose that was separate from the company, and that she was in charge of that one, and so they would be getting that. But that was something that the brothers didn't know about before the parents' deaths. And I think that ended up being one of the only, like, policies or amount of money that they actually got after their parents died.
So what was the next part of the conversation? Was that it?
I believe at some point she showed them what Jose was worth, which was 14 million, right? And Erik made a statement, like a surprise statement of, like, I had no idea my father was worth that much, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then Judge Weisberg ruled that those statements, they weren't admissible because it wasn't spontaneous enough.
I mean, I don't really understand that, but the brothers didn't know what Marta was going to talk to them about. So how is that not spontaneous?
Weisberg also made the argument that the brothers should have known they were going to be inheriting a lot of money because they lived in big houses, which is like just showing his bias of him assuming this was done for the money.
As an unbiased judge, wouldn't you take into account the brothers possibly thinking they were disinherited? You know what I mean? Rather than assuming that the brothers must have known that they would be inheriting a lot of money, you know?
Right.
So I think, yeah, that does show bias on his part.
Ugh.
Okay, so what happens next? People always bring up the fact that Lyle had hired a computer expert to delete a file named Will on Kitty's computer, right?
Well, what people say is Lyle deleted the will off the computer. But that's not what happened. Oh, hadn't the family found that file on the computer in that first week?
Yeah, in the first week, a bunch of the family members were going through the computer and trying to basically, I don't know, find out information that were on all these different files. So there were a bunch of family members who had already seen this file named Will before Lyle had even gone anywhere near the computer.
And I think they had told the brothers about its existence and that it wouldn't, even if it had even if it was an actual will, that it wouldn't be valid because I don't know if this is still true, but at that time, a will on the computer was not valid.
Yeah. I think as the computer expert that came to testify as well did say that the information that was on, like the data size of the file, was basically only amounting to maybe a few words. So there was no will on the computer. So I think that gets sort of misconstrued a lot. A lot of people seem to think that there was a will on the computer that got deleted, but that's just not true.
Yeah. The other thing is that when Lyle hired this computer expert, he hired a emergency expert to come and examine the computer. And he hired this person 10 days after the parents' deaths. So, if he was truly concerned about this file on the computer, and if that was on his mind at the time that he killed his parents, why didn't he hire this person immediately? Why didn't he hire them, even before all the family members came and were looking for the will and trying to figure out all the paperwork?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Lyle said that basically he had been around a bunch of family members who were concerned because there was like a family conflict that Carlos Menendez, who is Jose's cousin, is that right?
Yeah.
He had like gone behind the back of other family members and hired his own expert to look at the computer.
Lyle essentially was worried. He knew from his father that Carlos Menendez was kind of like a shady guy. So, and he knew that Carlos was snooping around and had hired a computer expert to come and inspect the computer.
Right, he had gone through Erik to do it.
Yeah.
And had sort of only talked to Erik about it and said, Erik, this guy's going to come over, basically.
So Lyle, knowing that this family member was kind of a shady guy, was worried about this, and he didn't want any of his like mother's private information getting out.
Right, because it was Kitty's computer.
Yeah. So he decided to fly back to California and emergency hire this expert to basically wipe the computer because he didn't want any of the information getting out because he was worried about his mother's private information. For decent, I mean, it's decent reasons enough, you know. I think he actually did say something like he was worried about anything about like the family secrets. Maybe something to do with it was on the computer and he just didn't want it to get out. And so he wanted the computer just completely wiped.
Yeah, so Lyle has this guy wipe the computer, and
Yeah, he just tells the guy that, oh, I want to wipe the computer because he wanted to sell it, I think.
yeah.
And that's about it. Oh, the receipt.
Yeah, and then he paid him like $100 or something and left the receipt in the room with the computer.
So that when Zola came to the house later on, Detective Zola found the receipt.
That was like 3 months afterwards, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So this was not something Lyle was hiding from anyone other than Carlos Menendez. So the value that gets thrown around is like $700,000 was spent by both brothers after they killed their parents, right?
Combined, right? Yeah.
Combined. And I think it's by all accounts, like Lyle was like 600,000 of that, and Erik was 100,000.
Yeah, I mean, Erik really, Erik did not spend. Erik spent hardly anything in comparison to Lyle.
Yeah, I think so. In Erik Tells All, they show like the total miscellaneous purchases, and Erik's was about $10,000, and Lyle's was $315,000.
Damn, Lyle.
I mean, it's consistent with how the brothers' spending was before.
Yeah.
So
what did Lyle actually spend money on?
Okay. So Lyle's major items were the restaurant in Princeton. He bought a Porsche, and this is where I get fuzzy. Did he actually buy a condo? Or was it rented?
I think they rented the apartments in Marina del Rey. But I think Lyle was the one who was paying money for both of them, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
They were right next to each other. Like, they had apartments that were right next to each other.
Like fancy apartments.
Yeah. I mean, you might want to find like an image of Marina del Rey. Maybe we can actually find what the apartments look like now. And like,
that'll be cool. Did they give the address in anywhere? Oh, I remember. It was the Marina City Club.
That's it, yeah.
I mean, it still looks like a place for rich people.
Hey, let me look at it.
It's like right on the
Oh, damn,
water.
that looks nice.
Yeah. Has tennis courts. Anyways, fancy place. I did want to go back to the restaurant though, because that was Lyle's biggest expense, I think, as he bought this restaurant in Princeton where he was going to school. Was he still going to school at that point? Well, no, he bought the restaurant to like have a job in the Princeton area, and he worked at the restaurant and hired all his friends to work there with him. He was like the manager, I think.
He hired Glenn Stevens and Hayden Rogers, right?
Right, and they worked there for him. And he paid like for them to have a car, and there was like they had like full-on contracts with him where Lyle paid for their living and travel expenses. And I think the other thing was that had been something that Lyle had expressed an interest in for a long time was working at owning a restaurant. That one of his coaches had said something about that, and that Lyle wanted to own a restaurant and make the money himself.
Yeah, that's Charles Wadlington.
When he was about 15, he started talking about goals, career goals.
Okay.
And he wanted to open up a restaurant. He wanted to come out here, as a matter of fact, and he wanted to start a restaurant, and he wanted to follow the family tradition of being successful, and he wanted to do it on his own, and he told me how he was going to do it. And
Do it on his own in what sense?
he wanted to make it on his own. He didn't want to have any help from his family.
So,
He always had an interest in restaurants.
right, this wasn't just like, oh, I'm rich now, I can buy a restaurant. This was something that he had been, something he had been thinking about for a while. You could make the argument like, oh, that means that he killed them so he could buy the restaurant. But if he had been expressing this interest since the age of 15 or something, why did he wait 6 years to kill his parents?
Yeah. Okay, so that's Lyle's big purchases.
Yeah. And lots of clothes and...
Yeah. I mean, his miscellaneous expenses were massive, so...
Yeah. But like we've been saying, not inconsistent with his entire life before his parents are killed.
As for Erik's spending afterwards, his big purchases was the Jeep. Although the Jeep, he did have the probate attorney with him at the time who was advising him.
Yeah, and he told Aunt Marta that he wanted it or something like that, or asked her about it.
Yeah, so there's that. There's the concert. I'm not too sure on the details, but apparently, from what I was able to gather, he asked Lyle for a loan and then put money towards a rock concert or planning it. It never went through. I know that, but I can't. He spent a bunch of money on that. I'm not really too sure on the details though.
I don't think I've seen any testimony about that yet. So
I don't think they bring it up in the trial for some reason. It's in Robert's book though. He hired his tennis coach Mark Heffernan to be his sole tennis coach, basically 24/7.
Okay, with respect to Erik Menendez, what was the agreement? How much would he have to pay you per month?
$5,000.
How much time would you spend with Erik Menendez?
I would spend all day with him. 5.5, 6 days a week.
How many hours would that be per day?
8 to 10.
And had Erik Menendez requested this arrangement?
Erik and Marta, his aunt, and the contract was decided upon between the brothers and Marta and myself.
I mean, but there's another example of Erik is spending money on work.
right, he's not I'm gonna blow 50,000 or whatever on making my life easier. He's literally spending this money to become a professional tennis player.
I think he was training 10 hours a day with Mark. That's insane.
I think from what I could gather, he was sort of looking for direction in a sense and feeling very lost. And so the family members encouraged both him and Lyle to sort of find projects or like find something to do. And so for Lyle, it was the restaurant, and Erik, it was the tennis. And I mean, that was what they were doing when they got arrested. That's how they were spending their time.
Like, to me, a lot of the spending just seems like them sort of trying to block out the trauma and the pain.
Yeah.
That's how I see it anyway.
Also, if it's like, yeah, going with the prosecution theory of like the brothers killed their parents because Jose was so demanding and domineering and controlling of them with their sports, then after they kill him, Erik continues to be controlled and have this extremely rigorous and rigid tennis schedule with this coach. Like, it doesn't make sense.
So he killed his father because he wanted to be free of his abusive tennis schedule, but then continues the same abusive schedule after he's killed his abuser. Like, what?
I mean, it doesn't make sense if that's
the
only
reason,
abuse.
yeah, if that was the reason why he killed him, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and that's his, like, one big thing that he spent money on, and it's something that he was already doing at an extremely rigorous level before.
Do you think there's an aspect of, I mean, this gets into like the whole psychology of abuse, but do you think there's something to do with still wanting to be connected to his abuser in a way, and that was sort of the one thing that he sort of shared with his dad?
It could be. I almost see it more as like he had spent his whole life being told what to do and controlled by Jose and like everything he did. And he needed that structure. And so without it, he was lost. That's why he hired Mark to basically tell him what to do all the time. And that also goes to the brothers, constantly asking relatives for advice of like what they should do with their lives, what they should do with the money, like, is it okay to buy these things, all of that. It's like, if they had killed their parents to be free of them, wouldn't they not want the approval of people anymore?
Yeah, Leslie does bring that up in her closing arguments, actually, that I think she said something to the effect of, like, they're both, like, straight afterwards, they're both going to adults and asking them, what do we do now? What are we supposed to do? So if they killed to be free of control, like, it doesn't make sense.
Right. They're still looking for control afterwards.
So after Erik's initial confession, sometime in when was the date? Do you remember when Erik went to Cancun?
It was in November of 1989.
Yeah, so sometime in November, after the initial confession to Azil, Erik went to Cancun with his, I guess you could say, best friend, his actual best friend, not Craig Signorelli, his best friend from the Princeton Day School, David Mrovich.
Just 3 months after the Menendez murders, Erik called his best friend Dave and asked him to meet him here in beautiful Cancun, Mexico, all expenses paid. Erik was having some trouble dealing with his mom and dad's debts. Little did Dave know at the time just how much trouble Erik would eventually be in.
He told me that now that his parents were dead, that the only thing holding him together was the fact that he had money. And he said, without that, he'd be nowhere.
That's a strange thing to say.
Yeah.
And I think that can be interpreted in many different ways. I sort of see it as Erik's being upset that he no longer has his parents, and that literally the only physical thing that is keeping him mentally sane to some degree is the fact that he has money to support himself. That's how I see it anyway.
But Dave Marovich can't believe that the motive was money.
They always had money. Money never seemed to be an issue for either of them. They already had all the money they needed.
I guess one last thing with Erik was that he told Aunt Marta that he wanted to donate the money that he got from the estate to create a foundation for homeless kids who run away from home.
Would that be the money that he got from the will, right?
Yeah, I think the money that they never ended up getting because they got arrested.
Again, it's like, if he killed for money, why does he want to give away all of his money to start a foundation for homeless kids who run away? What?
I think it's really telling and sad that it was specifically kids who run away from home.
I mean, Erik did try to run away from home when he was 12, right?
Right, yeah. I guess what it comes down to for me is maybe the spending after was a little more than it had been before. But it's not enough. It's not in excess of what they spent before enough for it to be a motive. And also, the grand jury did not indict them for murder for financial gain.
They didn't see enough evidence to prove that motive.
Right. Basically, I think that says if there was any indication that that was true, they would have included it because that's what everyone thought. It would have been so easy to tack it on there.
And yet the prosecutors in this case still tried to argue that fact.
Part of me wonders if they were just doing that to make people jealous and to taint the image of the truth of the brothers' lives,
For me personally, I just think the spending spree gets blown way out of proportion in terms of how it relates to the case. People always use the spending spree as evidence of murder for financial gain, but I think the more you look at the case and Erik and Lyle, the more the spending spree afterwards is more indicative of, one, I think their basic spending habits anyway, and also just how they mentally dealt with the killings afterwards and their depression.
Yeah.
Okay, so next time we're probably going to be focusing on specifically the abuse and molestation surrounding Lyle, relating both from Kitty and Jose, and how that affected and impacted Lyle and his state of mind, and how it impacted his decision-making on August 20th, 1989. So thanks again for listening, guys. It's been fun.